Hello, my name is Brandon Whitten. This is my ethnography presentation for my case study. So I'll be using some terms that are not common knowledge for those outside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'll kind of be defining each word as the church kind of has its own jargon. So what is a ward? That picture is a picture of our ward boundaries, actually. So a ward is a geographic area, as the boundaries show, and all the members in that area are assigned to that specific ward. The little red symbol is our church building. So all the members of the church within that area are assigned to be part of the St. Robert's First Ward. And what's a stake? It's several wards together. The area just to the west of this one is the St. Robert's Second Ward, and several wards make up a stake. A bishop is the main kind of leader over a single ward. No one that works in the church gets paid to do what they're doing. It's all volunteer basis. So the bishop is called by the stake president to see if he will be willing to be the bishop for that ward. And they usually serve for about 5 years. Sacrament meeting, it is the first hour of our church meetings. That is where we hold the sacrament. All of the members that attend church that day, they all meet in the chapel. They have sacrament, and there are some speakers as well. Second hour of church, second hour, it changes from what your calling is to what Sunday it is. There are like the little kids go to nursery, some of the older kids go to primary, even older, like teenager age, they go to young women's and young men's. The older adults, they either go to elders quorum for the men or relief society for the women, or every other Sunday it's Sunday school, so all the adults will meet in the same room to have Sunday school. Ward clerk, that is my calling in the church. It's kind of like the manager of the ward, kind of. I deal with attendance and reimbursements. I'm also the one that collects the tithing and sends it off to church headquarters. Fast offering. Once a month, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints conduct a fast for 24 hours. And the money that would go to those 2 meals is given to the church. And these are called fast offerings. And the last definition that I'll be going over real quick is the law of chastity. This is a commandment given to members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that has to do with chastity. It says, it boiled down in a nutshell, what it is the law of chastity is men and women will not have any sexual relations outside of marriage, and inside of marriage, it's only between a man and a woman to have those sexual relations. So getting on to my actual subject, the group that I based my case study on was my ward, the St. Robert's First Ward, which is part of the St. Robert's stake. The lowest amount of members I've seen on any given Sunday is 85, and the highest I've ever seen is 190, and that's just on a typical Sunday. The 190 was a Easter, so even though most members try to go every day, they're still raised members on Easter and Christmas times. I observed them during sacrament meeting, and then in between first and second hour, which I'll kind of talk about in a little bit. And during second hour, I would watch them with whatever I was doing on that Sunday. In the end, I was able to observe 11 hours of sacrament meeting, 2 hours teaching primary, 3 hours in Sunday school, 2 hours in elders quorum. That's my age group for the men. And 4 hours while on my clerk duties. These second hours have about 15 minutes taken out for every hour, as that's the time in between the church hour, or the first and second hour, that 15 minutes to get to the class. I also spent 3 hours chaperoning stake dance. and I'll talk about what those are in a little bit, and 3 hours helping a fundraiser. So my observations during sacrament meeting. So ethnography involves doing field work, immersing yourself in the life of a group of people in order to learn something about and from them. These are people that I already knew. However, when I was looking at them through that ethnography lens, definitely did help me learn something about them. So as ward clerk, I take attendance. This often involves walking down the aisles and in between the pews. I count everyone, babies and children that are laying on the ground. So this gives me a little bit better of a better view, basically, into these people, and watching them watch the speaker. It is typical for children to be fussy, if not altogether against sitting and allowing their parents to listen to the speaker. It has become pretty customary in the church, kind of the culture of the church, for parents of noisy kids to bring a quiet bag. This has quiet toys and snacks, so the kids will be busy playing with toys or eating those snacks and allowing the parents just a minute to watch the speaker. And just a few minutes for the kids not to be terribly loud. So speakers during the sacrament meeting, there's typically one youth speaker between the ages of 12 and 17. They're asked to give a talk between 3 and 5 minutes long usually. And there are 2 adult speakers. And they each speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. And once again, these are just members of the church. The bishop comes to them, asks them like, hey, are you willing to give a talk in church? They could say yes, they could say no. But that's what kind of the meat of sacrament meeting is being able to listen to these speakers that are just members doing their best to give a talk on a certain topic. It's kind of what the sermon is for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The only Sunday that don't do talks is fast and testimony meeting. As I was speaking of earlier, once a month, members of the church fast, and this is typically the first Sunday of the month. So there's no talks assigned, there's no testimonies assigned. This is just completely voluntary. If you feel like giving your testimony, you can go up and bear your testimony to everyone. We kind of just wait for people to volunteer to speak. Pretty typically during a fast and testimony meeting, there are some members that will give excellent testimonies, just go up there and bear their heart about the love that Christ has for everyone. Really Christ focused. There are also very typically among the culture of the church, youth, kids that'll go up and they want to bear their testimony. It's probably just an opportunity to speak into the microphone. But they'll go up and the person who controls the microphone will turn down the volume because the kid will go up and basically suck on the microphone and just go, I'd like to bring my testimony. People usually chuckle, but they just want to use the microphone essentially. But we let them go up to bear their testimony, to get in the habit of bearing their testimony. And then typically, I hate to say this, but there are usually some people who go up there and just talk, like not necessarily a testimony, not even based on Christ, but they just wanted to talk. So we let them do that. I've only seen like once or twice where someone just talks for a long time until the bishop says like, okay, maybe give someone else a chance, like after they go for 20 minutes just talking about their life. But the most important part of sacrament meeting is the sacrament, or the Eucharist. Everyone typically quiets down during this time, and while the young men pass around the bread and water. I'm not sure if it's because the kids can just tell that it's quiet, so they want to be quiet as well, or if they're just excited to get the bread and water, or if it's the spirit that they can feel that something has changed. This is typically one of the few times that the children will kind of quiet down, sit on their parents' laps, and just kind of wait. And like I said, it's probably just because they can sense that it's more reverent in the room, so they want to be more reverent as well. During sacrament meeting, I would often look around and see if I could see any visitors to see if they were feeling uncomfortable at all. There was one time we brought one of our friends who was kind of asking about the church. We brought him to church with us, and while they were passing around the sacrament, he leaned over. He's like, "Whitten, what do I do?" So it's always interesting to see visitors in the church, just because it becomes customary for us. Um, it was Paris and Howell that said tacit ethnocentrism. That is the assumption that one's own way of life is just normal, not cultural. And I'm definitely guilty of that. Like at church, I think that that's completely normal. That's what people do at church, but to other people, it could be very different to what they're used to. And Moschella said that recognizing such patterns in your own congregation of community is harder because they seem like second nature. That goes right along. They completely agree with each other on this point. Um, it just becomes second nature. This is what you're used to, so it doesn't seem that different. Between sacrament meeting and whatever second hour is for that Sunday, we have a few minutes to get to our next meeting. Because there are two wards that meet in the building, we're asked that after second hour, if we could be very quiet and actually exit the building, just so that other ward can have the opportunity to have a quiet and peaceful sacrament meeting. Completely understandable. But because of that, it only gives us that time in between meetings to really talk to our fellow members of the church and catch up on what they've been doing for the week. Some men will talk for a little bit, but usually the men are busy taking their little kids to classes, while the women usually talk and catch up. Part of this is because in church culture, a lot of the time, the men go to work while the women stay at home with the kids. So the men have plenty of adult interaction, but the women not so much because they're watching kids all day. So the women like to catch up, get some adult interaction while the men take care of the kids and then go to class. There was one time where I left the bathroom, or I left class to go to the bathroom, and there were still just tons of women. Like this is like 20-30 minutes into class, and they're just still standing in the hall just talking about the week or whatever they needed to talk about. There was one ward that I was in years ago where it was a recurring issue. The bishop was getting kind of upset that there were so many people missing from class because they were in the hall talking to each other. So he made an announcement during sacrament meeting. He's like, hey, remember, it's very important that we go to our classes, whatever they may be. And I mean, the people who were causing the problem didn't really listen. They wanted to talk to each other in the hallway, which is no one minded. They weren't bothering anyone just by staying in the hall and talking. And conversations are extremely important to have, especially with those adult interactions. It was Moschella that said, we give shape, meaning, and coherence to our lives through telling personal stories, family stories, religious stories, and cultural stories. So as I mentioned, like it's extremely important that people have these interactions with each other. So as I mentioned earlier, second hour can be a lot of different things. I'm just going to go through the different places where I made my observations one by one. So I have been asked a couple of times in this ward to help out with primary. Those are the kids between 3 and 11 years old, which is always fun. I have 5 kids for a reason. I love kids. The kids at church act like kids, of course. My lessons to the 5-year-olds, after talking, like saying, Christ loves you, kid would raise his hand and be like, I ate a bug this week. So, of course, everyone else wants to talk about the crazy thing that they did that week. And I try to just basically just get out like the main point that I'm trying to give them. Like, kids, just for 1 second, please listen. Christ loves you. Okay, now talk about your bugs. And part of primary is singing time. There was the singing time leader. She would call people to help her. Like she had this jar of popsicle sticks, and she pulled them out and called the kid's name, and they would come up and help. There was one time where she called Emmett, and people like no one responded, so people kind of looked around, and she goes Emmett, and she's looking. So we were able to look where she was focusing in, and the kid was just laying on the chair, like just staring off into space. She goes Emmett a third time, and he kind of just like turns around his head. He's like, huh. Like, would you like to come up and help? And then he was excited, of course. It's just funny that it took 3 times calling his name for him to actually react. Kids are kids, even in church. As a ward clerk, um, I couldn't observe people as much because I'm kind of put in an office. However, people were almost always in that office. Um, One of my main duties was for families that came into the ward. They would go into the clerk's office and kind of introduce themselves, and I would move their records from their old ward to the new ward. So this was an opportunity that I had to observe like the new families. I would also typically look to see if they had any kids the same age as my kids. So it's just to see if it's possible that my kids could have another playmate. And this is a partially military branch, so there are a lot of move outs and move ins, especially during PCS season, which is kind of when everyone leaves and comes. So, yeah, there's always families coming in and out of the ward. Another thing that I do is I handle reimbursements. So if someone spends money for a church activity, they turn in the receipts and I give them a reimbursement from the ward's budget. Typically, the people who spend their own money on the activities and need those reimbursements are kind of older families, people that have been in the ward for a long time. So in the clerk's office, I get to see all the new families. I get to see a lot of the old families. So it still is able to do much observing, even in the office where I'm kind of doing more computer work. One thing that is very common in Sunday school for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is comments. There's no teacher assigned to teach Sunday school. However, there is a discussion facilitator assigned. The meat of Sunday school and the things that we learn, it's from each other. People bring in stuff that they learned that week from scriptures. And once again, as very typical in the church, there will be some people who give awesome comments, things that really make you think and like, oh, I'm going to mark that in my scriptures right now. That was excellent. And then there are sometimes stereotypically the older people in the ward that don't have much interaction with other people. They just really want to talk, and they'll give topics or they'll give comments that sometimes are not on topic, not even close. But it's always like, oh, okay, thank you for that. That was excellent. Thank you. Very stereotypically. Another stereotype within the church is that women will they'll prepare for these excellent lessons. They'll bring centerpieces. They'll bring in treats for everyone, and they'll prepare this excellent lesson. Men, on the other hand, kind of drop the ball. Like, kind of the running joke is that the men show up to elders quorum. It's like, who's teaching? I have no idea. Let's open up the manual and just read this week's lesson. It's kind of the running joke. Sometimes, unfortunately, it is kind of true. My wife will always tell me about like the excellent lessons they had in Relief Society, and I'm like, we read pages like 127 to 135. That's what we did for our lesson. So stake dances are a huge part of culture for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Culture is the socially acquired set of practices, norms, and or values that groups of people live by. I mean, I've been to church in many places in the United States, been down to Brazil, went to several wards down there, been to Korea, just one ward in Korea. However, all of them are the same. Like there has to be stake dances. That is just a big staple across the entire church. Stake dances typically have tons of refreshment. There will be some teens that are dancing while others are eating the snacks. Some just stand by the wall and wait for a slow song and hope that someone asks them to dance. The songs are always clean, as well as the dancing is very clean. There's like the common phrase that chaperones say at stake dances, where during a slow song we'll go up to people and be like, "Hey, remember, there's got to be a scriptures width between you guys." When I was a teenager, anytime someone said that, the common phrase was, "Hey, the scriptures come on CD." I was a chaperone at a stake dance not too long ago, and I kind of did the same thing. I went up to a couple. I was like, "Hey, remember, got to be able to fit a scripture width in between you two." And the guy kind of looked at me and goes, "Scriptures are on my phone, and my phone's in my pocket." And I'm like, "You guys don't get it." So apparently, some of these cultural things die as technology advances. So there's also, they also suggest Sunday attire, or business casual. Every once in a while they have like a more casual stake dance. And I remember, once again, when I was a teenager, I would go in, and if I wasn't wearing a tie on one of the Sunday attire dances, they had ties and they would slip it on you. Even if you were just wearing a t-shirt, they would put that tie over the t-shirt so you could be in Sunday attire. Now they don't do that. It's much more along like the church's stance now is a little bit more. It's better that they're here even in the wrong outfit than somewhere else, no matter what their outfit is. It's always better to be in the church. The church is also very big into service projects. In fact, after Hurricane Katrina, there was a news reporter, and they reported like the first people on ground were the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they're being like a big help. And the second group to arrive that is also a big help are the Mormons. So of course it's just a confusion, like both the same church. Mormons are just a nickname, of course. But yeah, we're big into service projects. It's called Helping Hands. It's a huge corporation. But when there's like camp coming up or something that needs extra expenses, those service projects oftentimes turn to fundraisers. I was able to help with a fundraiser, which was a car wash. And watching the youth participate in this, it was very interesting. A lot of the time, the young men and the young women will just kind of group into their own little cliques. They'll mess around, they'll show off to members of the other gender, while 3 or 4 of the older young men did kind of 90% of the work. So this is to raise funds for camp, and those that, like, if it didn't reach the goal that was required for everyone to go to camp, then the ward goes into the fast offerings, which was talked about earlier, for poorer families that can't quite afford to send their girls or their kids to camp, whether it's scout camp or girls camp, whatever it is, that comes from the fast offerings that are offered. Getting to some of the changes through the years. Before I go any further, I do want to state that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, it does not change its doctrine. It has been the exact same for quite some time. The first presidency, which is the prophet and his counselors and the 12 apostles, they released an official declaration, and with it they offered this quote. In the last 200 years, the Lord has revealed many truths to his prophets. Some revelations lead to policy changes, such as those found in the official declaration. Adjustments are a natural part of the true and living church. However, doctrine, the foundational eternal truths of the gospel, never change. So one thing that has kind of culturally tweaked over the last couple decades is same-gender attraction and the law of chastity. So those who have tendencies to same-gender attraction have the same rules as everyone else. As I stated before, the law of chastity, it's that men and women shall have no sexual relations outside of marriage between a man and a woman. So the church, I feel, used to frown at those who would break the law of chastity due to same-gender attraction. However, while the doctrine has not changed, it's still the law of chastity. The church has a much more open and loving stance towards those who deal with this. It's more of a Christ loves everyone and welcomes everyone approach, and we welcome all to attend church, and no matter how they come, we want them at church, basically. Howell and Paris said, "These are some of the most challenging issues facing Christians today. Christian families, local churches, and entire denominations are fraught with conflict over the proper role of women, same-gender or same-sex marriages, and ordination of gay ministers." Another change that's happened over the years, which I'll talk about in just a second, is polygamy. So in ethnography as a pastoral practice, Moshella gives a couple of puzzles, a couple of questions, um, which are extremely intriguing. The developmental puzzle, how did this become? Mechanical puzzle, how does this work? Uh, Comparative puzzles, how does this compare to that? And casual predictive puzzles, how does this impact that? Um, well, I've been a member my whole life. I thought I knew these things, but while watching the board, I stopped and thought a little bit more about these, um, and it brought me to some realizations that I wouldn't have made without this assignment. The one that I want to talk about here is the developmental puzzle, or how does this come to be? Um, and the point I want to talk about is polygamy, which I was talking about just a little bit ago. Why does the church begin with polygamy? While the church was young, more women were joining than men. Plus, there were many battles that the church was involved in. There was the Battle of Crooked River. There was the Hans Mill Massacre, where several members of the church were killed, primarily men protecting their families. On top of this, there was also Governor Boggs, the governor of Missouri. He issued the Missouri Executive Order 44, also known as the Extermination Order. Part of that, quoting here, says, "The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary for the public peace." It essentially just became legal to kill members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Because of all these reasons, there were many more women than men. In the past, God sanctioned polygamy. We believe at this time he did again. Once the balance was restored, he removed it. It's as simple as that. Once again, this is not a doctrinal change as much as a policy change. It could also be looked as a cultural change. It was kind of becoming more frowned upon in the country, and the church changed its policy as well. This is the bibliography. Leaned heavily on ethnography as a pastoral practice, an introduction, and introducing cultural anthropology, a Christian perspective.